be connected, but let me go and check YouTube because, as usual, I don't trust YouTube because they always tell you you're connected and then you're not, and you look like an idiot. Well, in my case, that's the usual. I not that anything changes, but I just want to check and confirm we are connected. Yes, we are connected. So, hello, everybody, again. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, depending on the time of the day you're watching this. This is a show, just so you know, this is not about comics, this is about time traveling. We talk about physics here because here it's 5:01 p.m. and where Tom is 11 a.m. So we're actually time traveling, believe it or not. We are in two sides of a wormhole. No, that's bullshit. don't listen to me. But before we start, first of all, hello, Tom. How are you?
Good. How are you, David?
We're doing fine, thank you.
Good.
As usual, people. See this? This is very appropriate today, right? Yes? Yes? Okay.
Yep.
Marble? Yeah. Okay. So, wear your fucking mask. This is the point. Wear your mask. This is, I always repeat it, and it's important. The mask is not meant to protect you. It's meant to protect others from you. That's why we use it. To protect our elders, to protect people with illnesses, to protect everybody. And if somebody tells you that kids don't get COVID, blah, 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 that's a lie. We have to protect people. We have to be decent. That's the most important thing. So please wear your mask. And last but not least, as I always say, and I always lose viewers because I say it and I don't give a shit, being completely honest, if you think your personal freedom is too important and you care more about your own ass than anybody else's safety, please leave this channel now because I don't want you here. With that said,
and really, you know, people who are comic book fans and who've been following these characters and these things for so long, you know, everybody when they were younger wanted to wear a mask in the first place. So this is your chance to live out that childhood dream and wear a mask like your favorite characters. And on the second hand, virtually any character that you're talking about would be wearing the mask. So, you know, walk the walk as as people do and should. It's not that hard. It's not an onerous thing. It's an opportunity to be able to walk around on the street wearing some mask like a character out of a comic, and for you not to look like a lunatic or a goon.
Yeah, exactly. You know, as Tom said, this is your chance. You've been wanting to do this all your life. And now you can do it, and the cops are not going to get you to jail because you look like, you know, something dangerous. So this is your chance. Use it. So, Tom, first question. Imagine I'm your doctor. My name is Victor Frankenstein. Very nice to meet you. This pen is my syringe, so I just popped it into you a couple times. You're safe. You know, pandemic is over.
Okay.
You've been thinking since March. This is what I want to do at the moment this ends. Like crazy, like, oh my god. Yeah. So what is that thing that you could do first of all?
I honestly don't know what I haven't been focused really on heading out. You know, in some ways I'm sedentary enough that being trapped in my home for now months and months and months and only venturing out infrequently hasn't been as much of an impediment to me as it maybe has been to other people. You know, I tend to think about longer distances rather than shorter distances. You know, I had been planning a trip to England in 2020 that didn't come off because obviously with the COVID and the restrictions, you couldn't do that. I wanted to go back to Japan again. You know, I think about that sort of stuff even more than just the normal.
Yeah.
You know, but you know, the real answer is I'm going to end up going to work. I'm going to go into the city again and go to our Marvel offices because that's, you know, apart from one trip to clean the office out, I haven't set foot in that building in almost a year.
Wow. How much do you miss the office?
These were new offices. Like we had just
the new ones. That's true.
Yeah, we had just moved into new offices in January. So we were only there for about, you know, a little over 2 months. So I don't miss those offices at all, really. But
let me rephrase it. How much do you miss the people and interaction?
But yeah, Yeah, that's the thing is the having the community of the Marvel editors and having people all there face to face, to not only coordinate stuff in the books and the stories and everything, but to have the social component that keeps us all hooked in with one another and linked together, where we eat lunches or have impromptu meetings or just talk about what was on TV or what was broadcast last night, or all of this sort of stuff, which is a lot harder to do when we're all spread out all over the world, as we are now.
And that's also, part of it is the zeitgeist, right? I mean, if you guys are just in the office and start talking about something that is buzzing in your collective heads because it's on TV or something like that, that can either consciously or unconsciously, that can pour into the stories, right? Because it's
Oh, for
something
sure.
that is out there, and that without being together in the office, that is a lot more difficult, right?
Yes, and also like there's a spirit, there's a feeling of Marvel that comes from us all being together and sharing this sort of common gestalt,
Hmm.
as the younger editors and the newer people that come into the group, begin to absorb what it is that makes us Marvel. And
Yeah,
it's an intangible thing, and it's very difficult to maintain, again, when everybody is spread out and nobody's in the same place with one another. We're managing, we're doing fine, but it's not the most conducive way
absolutely.
to do this.
Hmm. And what you just said it, so I had to ask, what makes Marvel Marvel?
Um, well, I mean, it's all the stuff. Obviously, from a story point of view and a making comics point of view, it's all the stuff that Stan would always talk about. That the characters and the stories are really about the people in the costumes rather than the costumes and the powers. That while there's a
Hmm.
lot of fantastical stuff that goes on, and we have characters that can do every ridiculous thing under the sun, the things that make them interesting and relatable and worth reading, and that create that attachment to the audience, is the fact that they're all kind of flawed human beings with feet of clay and their own personal problems and romantic problems and financial problems and so forth, and that's really the thing, and that the characters are the same characters whether they're in the outfits or not. And so there's that genuineness of it, amongst Marvel as an editorial staff. I think, and I haven't really experienced any of the other sides of the street. I've worked at Marvel and only Marvel, although I've dealt with my counterparts at other outfits.
Hmm.
I think Marvel, we tend to be much more stripped down than most other places do. There's a lot less institutional bureaucracy, for all that
Hmm.
people seem to think that every move we make is puppeteered by some mouse at Disney or something. But we're kind of scrappy. We kind of don't always have the same kind of resources that other outfits have, which is difficult for people to understand when we're also we also have a Marvel Studios that's making more money than
Thank
anybody
God.
else.
You can say it.
Um,
More money than God.
um, and so we tend to operate quickly, and we tend to do a lot with a little.
Yeah.
And that, again, that just creates a certain spirit, and that spirit goes back to Stan and all the other originators, Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and John Romita and whomever. That sense of community and that sense of fun that was instilled in those bullpen pages and in the books, and the sense that the audience is kind of a part of that with us when we do it right, when we do it properly.
Hmm. I
Um,
think that's really funny. I remember, talking to the family or outsiders. That's one of the most difficult things to explain to them. How I try to explain how fast Marvel moves, how things change. How you have to be
yeah,
really adaptable and really fast. And they're like, "Well, but it's Marvel. Marvel is huge." And I'm like, "Uh-huh. You're thinking about Marvel Studios." No, but Marvel's, yeah, but it's not,
right,
Marvel editorial is really fast. As you said, it's
yep,
scrappy. And this is one of the things that I like the most working with you guys, because
yeah,
things can change at any moment. You just have to be very paying attention. That could be the way.
Yeah,
That would be
yeah.
what to say it.
And I think honestly, even Marvel Studios embodies that too. That for a movie studio, they move a lot quicker and are a lot more adaptable than most of the other big studios. It's just the difference in timeline between making feature films and, making comics. We operate on a monthly schedule and they tend to operate on a yearly schedule. So what still seems slow, in
Of
comparison,
course, yeah.
is still very, very, very quick and very adaptable by the metric of other outfits that are also making films.
Yeah, I was told, once in Hollywood by somebody from other studio. Literally, the phrase was the advantage that Marvel Studios has compared to the others is that Marvel Studios, even if it's now owned by Disney, still operates like an independent company. Like a
Mhm.
small amount of people, which give them the capability, Feige and the others, to just
Yep.
move much faster than the others in terms of making decisions, right?
Yeah, I think again, I only get to see it from afar, and a couple of times a year we might not this year, but we might fly out and have meetings with Kevin and his team, and we tell them what we're doing, and they tell us what they're doing, and so that there's some degree of familiarity and communication and sharing, so that again, so that that feeling of Marvel can be can be kept up, even though publishing is on the East Coast and studios is on the West Coast. So it's all kind of the same thing, and that's my observation.
Mhm.
More than anything, but I think it's true.
Yeah, and you were talking before about one of the things that makes Marvel Marvel, I think, is exactly what you said. It's at first about the person, the character, and then about the powers. It's about their circumstances, their life, the feat of clay. What many of the definitions that have been told during the years. And as we talked before we started, this year is the 60th anniversary. No, sorry, 80th anniversary
80th of
Of
yes,
Captain America, and the 60th of the Fantastic Four, right?
yes,
So
yes.
what do you think that humanity is what made them, you know, stay still as relevant as they are right now?
I think certainly with the Fantastic Four, the Fantastic Four were the first of the Marvel characters. What we think of as the beginning of the Marvel Age of Comics, when Kirby and Lee, started to revolutionize the field, and the thing that made them different from everybody else. And it's
Mhm.
harder to see it today because at this point, pretty much, creators at all companies tend to pull from the same pool and do the same kinds of things. So stuff that was innovative in the Marvel books in the 60s is now just, omnipresent and everywhere. But the idea that these were characters that had individual personalities, that had lives, that weren't just about being superheroes, and that could even would argue with one another and complain about things and be grumpy and have difficulties. That was kind of the game changer that put Marvel on the map in the 60s, and it all really started with Fantastic Four. So they're the vanguard, they're the spear point of the whole thing, and now they're the first of all those characters to see those anniversaries. Next year in 2022, we'll have Spider-Man and Hulk and Thor will all have anniversaries, and then the year after that, it's Iron Man and Avengers and X-Men, and the year after that is Daredevil. So there's this kind of build where in a very concentrated amount of time, only about 3.5 years, all of this stuff was created that's gone on to still be successful 60 years later. And
Mhm.
even the stuff that was failures are successes. That's one of the things I like to talk about when I talk about especially early Marvel and Marvel over the period, is that if you wait long enough at Marvel, even the things that fail will succeed. And I can point to 3 or 4 things for like early Marvel. The Hulk was canceled after 6 issues. They did 6 issues. It didn't sell. They canceled it, but then they kept the character around and they brought him back, and it became a series in Tales to Astonish. And now the Hulk is known everywhere, and particularly in the 70s, he was one of the most popular characters we had with the TV show and so forth. X-Men was canceled in 1970. They did X-Men for 7 years. They couldn't get it to sell terribly well. They canceled it. They made it a reprint book, and then we brought it back, and it became the biggest thing in the industry for 25, 30 years. And then, like, kind of the latest example is Ant-Man. Ant-Man is a failure no matter how you measure it. They couldn't figure out how to make Ant-Man work in the 60s. They turned him into Giant Man. They added the Wasp. They changed the costume. And eventually they were just kind of done. They rotated him out in favor of Namor. And now, today, we're talking about the third Ant-Man movie. There are going to be 3 Ant-Man movies, about this character that, in 1966 was a failure. So, literally anything that Marvel does, because we use the whole buffalo, we use every part of it. Over time, there's nothing that stops somebody from coming up with a fresh approach or a fresh idea, fresh take on something from the past, and turning what seemed to be a failure or a bad idea into something that people love. More recently, I look at things like Squirrel Girl. Squirrel Girl appeared in one story in 1993. It was an inventory. It was burned off in the back of a Marvel Superheroes issue. And people at the time, editorial at the time, hated it. They hated that story. They thought the character was dumb. They thought it was stupid. And really, the only time for the next 10 years, the only time Squirrel Girl showed up was to be the butt of a joke on the bullpen page or in, Marvel Illustrated or something. And yet over the last couple of years, creators, particularly Ryan North and Erica, found an approach on that character that made her successful. And today there are Squirrel Girl dolls and toys, and she's been in animation, and she's been and people know who she is. People are at any convention that you could have gone to a year ago. There are constantly, girls,
Absolutely.
in Squirrel Girl outfits, and that's exactly the sort of thing that I'm talking about. So as we develop things, as we build stories and experiment with stuff, we'll still occasionally just try things, and if they don't work, that's okay, because it doesn't mean that they won't work forever. It just means that there's more stuff in the pile that somebody might be able to come along with. America Chavez is another kind of example of that. I don't think she was a failure, but she was, Joe Casey and God, I'm blanking on the name now of the artist. Introduced her in the Vengeance limited series. He's a good artist too. Drew East of West for with Jonathan.
Let me find it now. Now I'm the same as you. I'm like, how can I forgot the name? So
Yeah. But they introduced America in that story, and it was a perfectly fine story, but nothing really happened. And then a couple of years later, Kieran and Jamie used her in Young Avengers, and from there, she built up some popularity. And Nick Dragata, thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
I saw it on Google same time that. Thank you, Dante.
Yeah, I don't want to take anything away from Nick because he's a fantastic artist, and I feel bad about having forgotten that right there. But and now this character too, like, has a big fan base that you couldn't have predicted from those earliest appearances in that Vengeance limited series. So everything we do, we're constantly trying to not only to build and develop on the stuff that's there and to maintain the classic characters that have gone on for 60 years or 80 years, but also to put new pieces into the stack, new raw material that even if we don't quite hit it right today, somebody maybe can hit it right tomorrow, and it'll pay dividends down the line.
And I think that's one of your challenges, and also one of your goals as an editor, right? To always keep in mind there's no bad characters, there's bad stories, or even not even bad stories. Sometimes, as you said with America Chavez, is that the story doesn't land at the right moment.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
You challenge yourself to find new takes on characters, right?
For sure. And again, like all those things that I talk about in terms of the failures that are successes, some of that is it was just the wrong idea at the wrong time, like you say, or the approach wasn't quite there, the zeitgeist wasn't there, and it's no different than the rest of popular culture. What was popular in the 70s or the 90s is not the same thing as what's popular today.
Yeah.
And so, it's what speaks to the audience in that particular moment and what they're looking for out of their entertainment and their stories, and which characters best reflect that. Which is why with characters like Captain America and the Fantastic Four, over the course of all the years they've been around, there have been times when they've been like the best-selling, hottest thing, and there have been times when they've only sold, at a mediocre level because they were just, out of step with the zeitgeist of that moment. But given enough time, that wave curve always kind of bounces back up, and these characters have proven their strength and their resilience, through that longevity,
Yeah.
and they're adaptable enough that there's always somebody new who can come along and have a new perspective on them and make them relevant to the zeitgeist again.
But that's
They've
also,
been in
oh, go please.
as I, they've been invented and reinvented, over the years a bunch of times. For all that, they're still exactly the same as they were at the start.
Hmm. And then we go, as you said, that's one of the most fascinating things at Marvel is that any different character can become the top biggest selling character at a different point, right? When you expect,
Sure.
hey, 15 years ago nobody cared about the Hulk. Just I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean. And
Yeah.
suddenly Immortal Hulk is right there in the top 10 every
Yeah.
month. And
Yeah.
you have to tell people, then they say, oh, I've never seen a horror take on the Hulk, and you're like, well, that's the origin, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. It's what Al and what Joe have done there is just kind of go back to that classic idea of the Hulk as a monster, and they also imbued it with a sort of more modern body horror kind of aspect to it as well. But they all, like Al is very conversant with the history of the Hulk, and again he touches on all the periods and uses all of the stuff that his predecessors have established about the character to kind of look at it in a different way and to give it a different tone and a different texture. And it was a thing that people responded to because, like you say, they hadn't seen that kind of take on the Hulk at least for a number of years, if not exactly that take for forever. And so right now the Hulk is a popular book, and there'll be other characters that are not as popular today, but that tomorrow with the right take or the right story, can pop just the same way.
Mm-hmm. And where do you think the fans, I could say, where do you think the fans are taking us? I mean, are we going in the same direction we have been in the last few years, or do you think that new fans are coming and we have to again reinvent ourselves as an industry?
I think it's obviously both. We have readers that have been around, for decades. And we love those readers and we like having them around, and some of them are super interested in whatever the new thing is, and some of them are very dedicated to their classic favorites and want them in a certain way and a certain style. But there's certainly a new audience simply due to the fact that Marvel is now more than ever a globally recognized brand, to use the term. And people are more familiar with more of the characters, mostly because of the reach that the films have.
Mm-hmm.
And the movies have already used a fairly deep bench of characters, even incidentally,
Mm-hmm.
that people are now having a casual awareness of that they never would have had 10 years ago. So there are definitely new readers coming in. They don't tend to come in through comic shops as much. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there will still be people that go to comic shops for their first time and immerse themselves, but they're more likely to get into that world through collections of some sort or through digital.
Mm-hmm.
Because those are the distribution chains that are more likely to reach them, or that they're more likely to react to. Somebody's more apt these days to come out of or be waiting for an Avengers Infinity War movie and go on to Amazon or a similar online seller and buy, there's an Infinity Gauntlet collection, so
Yes.
let me buy that. So either I can read about what's going to be coming up in the movie, or I can read more about what just happened in the movie. And that tends to happen. And then once they've got that material in their hands, or they'll buy it, digitally through through Marvel or through Comixology, or they'll get a subscription to the Marvel Unlimited. And again, once they're reading stuff, then they begin to become immersed, into our world, and they begin to migrate more to the comic specialty stores, where they can get more and a more concentrated version of what they want. So, but I think it's always a balancing act, and it's always a push and pull on the rubber band, in terms of, you don't want to get too far away from, the core concepts of the universe, but you also always have to be pushing things forward, because you can't just be doing, whatever, the same Captain America stories again and again and again the same way. That gets dull even to the audience that likes them that way. For all that they like, a Captain America or a Fantastic Four or whomever in a certain style, they want it to be new and fresh too. They want it to be as exciting as it was to them when they first started reading the character. And so, it's that dichotomy, in that you want to change it, but you want to change it enough so that they're interested, but not so much that they feel alienated. And sometimes, the difference too is, our audience can get, because they're so emotionally invested in the characters and their history and whatnot, you can start a story and they get very, very nervous about where it's going to go and how it's going to resolve. And once that story is over, it becomes more popular than it was even when it was going on. Like, the two examples I can certainly point to on this, where, one is Superior Spider-Man. When they did that, and when Dan Slott started writing that, it was like the sky was falling. Peter Parker was dead, and he wasn't going to be Spider-Man again ever. And this is awful, and this is a slap in the face to all of Spider-Man history and so forth. And there was a part of the audience that really were afraid that this was going to be the thing. And once the story ended, and they could look at it and go, oh, okay, nothing bad happened, it's just a cool story, they could then go back and experience it as trades or collected editions or whatnot, and read those stories without whatever anxiety there was that, oh my God, this is a terrible thing. Same kind of thing with Nick Spencer's Secret Empire. Everybody would crazy. Oh no, Cap is a Hydra agent. That's the worst thing ever. How could they do this?
I remember.
Yep. And once it was finished, and once it all came out and it was all right, not everybody, but a bunch of people could go back and read it and go, that I actually kind of liked that story.
Yeah.
So a lot of things, Brian and I used to talk about this every once in a while, because it happened time and again on all the big event stories that he did, House of M and Secret Invasion and Siege and such, Avengers versus X-Men, that while they were going on, a portion of the audience was always, very, very, very jittery and very uncertain and very anxious. And after they were over and started to show up in collected editions or in digital or whatnot, a whole different audience came to them and just enjoyed them as stories and didn't have that same uncertainty.
Yeah, it's fun because in a way you think, and I remember we discussed this when Secret Empire was happening. Guys, you've been reading comics forever. This is not going to stand. This. There's going to be an ending. So in a way, it's like, how can you believe this is the status quo forever? But in another way, you think, well, but it's actually good that they get so invested in the character.
Yes, right? It is absolutely good, and the fact that, again, whether it's a younger reader, and I say younger not in terms of age, but in terms of length of reading, who hasn't been through this before, which certainly happens. Like, it's your first time seeing one of these big crazy stories that seem to change stuff, or if you're somebody that's read a million of them, you can still be invested enough and be concerned about what this is, because you feel so connected to it.
Absolutely. And also, there's a thing that it's a lot of fun for me as a reader, as a professional, is to see not fun, not the word. It's curious. At least it's happening in Spain and in Europe, and I want to know if it's happening in the US too.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see the influx of new readers is coming, especially from bookstores, as it's happening here in Europe? And I mean superhero, because people,
Right.
when they say that, they tell me, "Oh, but you mean graphic novels? You mean slice of life?" And I'm like, no. I also mean superheroes, and there's a lot of new readers, a lot of young readers that
Yeah.
are coming from bookstores, because that's where their parents go with the kids and see the book, as they did in newsstands in the past, and they just
Yes.
got the collected edition for the kids. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that same thing is happening here, although not over the last year because nobody's going
Yeah,
to bookstores right now.
same thing
But
here.
but yeah, I mean, one of our biggest areas of growth is through Scholastic, and the book lines that they have that are aimed at readers of different age groups. And again, because the characters are so familiar, everybody used to know who Spider-Man it was, but now everybody knows who Iron Man is, or Ant-Man is, or whomever. Hello,
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
But just my daughter just came from school and she just popped into.
Bye-bye.
All right,
Close the door, please. I'm sorry.
it's all right.
She just came from school. She normally just closes the door. But anyway, she wanted to say hello. You were saying, sorry.
Now that everybody is more aware of that, like there's much more of a hunger for an Iron Man book or an Ant-Man book or a Hulk book or whatever, and that audience is there and is receptive to it. Like, they understand it in a way that they didn't understand it before there were movies that they could instantly stream and probably have. And all this exposure to the characters, as there is now.
Mm-hmm. Well, imagine that you're getting a pitch today for whomever, doesn't matter. What's the things that, as a Marvel, that makes a good pitch for a Marvel book, first, and second for you as a person, human being, an editor, whatever, and then the other side of the question, which would be, what's the thing you dread seeing in a pitch, in that, oh no, not again mode?
Right. Well, it's I have a hard time telling people what makes for a good pitch, because when I really boil it down, it comes down to, there's some idea in your pitch that I respond to, and that's not a metric that you can measure. Obviously,
is it instinct after all these years? In a
a
way,
lot of
gut feeling.
I mean, a lot of it is instinct, sure. I mean, when you talk about casting talent on titles or on projects, sometimes you have an idea and sometimes you don't. Every once in a while, I'll talk to 2 or 3 people and say, hey, I'm looking to get a new team on whatever, Iron Man. Do you have an idea? And people will come with ideas, and something will spark out of that. But just as often, I have a sense of what I'm looking for, and I'll go to just one person and say, hey, would you be interested in writing Iron Man? What would you do with it? And that's all that it is. So it does change from time, and every once in a while, a creator will show up and say, hey, I have a really great idea for Iron Man if the opportunity ever presents itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so that also goes into the thing. But I think, in terms of a pitch, obviously it's having a good idea that's clear and concise and communicated well. It doesn't have to be long. In fact, long is probably your enemy, because I'm never going to read a long pitch. I may take forever to read a short pitch, because I have too much other stuff that actually has to be read in order to make the comics every month. So really, if you can hook me with an idea, with something that speaks, or I feel like it speaks to the character,
Mm-hmm.
to the life of the audience, to the zeitgeist, in some interesting way, or I think that there's an angle on. I can always ask you, oh, that's cool. Why don't you develop that a little more? Give me a more substantial outline or whatever. So I don't need them to be long. But in terms of what it actually is, because this stuff is always changing, the landscape, the ground is always changing. there's no one set of instructions that I can give people to go, this is exactly how you do the perfect Marvel pitch, apart from get your ideas down to a level where they're easily understandable. Pitch them simply, pitch them concisely, and the rules of storytelling apply. Get in as late as you can, get out as early as you can, so that I've just got the concentrated idea in front of me that I can react to. And even that, though, may not work, because the idea that you think is wonderful may not say anything to me. Or it may not say anything to me, but maybe it says something to Nick Lowe or Jordan White or somebody else. Yeah. And then I call them a fool, and I tell them they don't know what they're doing and they're idiots. But, it's all part of the process. Yes. In terms of things to not do, certainly length is a big one. And every once in a while you'll run into somebody that has their magnum opus that they've been working on for 5 years. And they've almost got it right, and they'll tell you about this, and I kind of secretly know that will never be a thing, because they're so concerned about it and being so precious and so precise, they will never actually finish it. Yep. For all that they've invested so many years in it. And also the people that are so protective of their ideas, or so afraid to let go of the one good thing that they have, or to put it out there, because really ideas, good and bad, they're the currency that we operate in. But every day, if I'm working at some kind of capacity, I throw out half a dozen ideas. Not all of them are good, maybe none of them are good, but they get churned through. And again, an idea that doesn't work today may still work years down the line. There are projects I'm working on now that pick up on ideas that we had years ago, and that just at the time didn't fit, but now are applicable. Yeah. Other stuff are the people that want to come in off the street and change the characters completely. And that's sort of you learn to walk before you can run. Like you earn the right to do that sort of thing. We're not looking to reinvent Iron Man completely necessarily. We're looking for good Iron Man stories. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes what we want is a really good wheel. Yes.
Which is what's happening now with Chris and with Cafu, right?
Sure.
We're going back to the core of Iron Man.
Right, and that too is sort of like, that's a very personal and a very different take. Like Chris and Kafu's Iron Man is a very different series than Dan and Valerio's Iron Man, which was a different series than Brian's and Alex's and Stefano's Iron Man before that. Absolutely. So it's the same character, but each team brings a different perspective to it. That's their own experiences and what they personally like or relate to in the character. Again, if we hit it right, then the audience responds and it becomes successful. And if not, eventually somebody else will do Iron Man, and there'll be a different take that'll be different than Cantwell's and Kafu's. And maybe that one will do better, or maybe it will do worse, but it'll be different. The other things, and I have the example that since I've been talking about it publicly, it's slowed down a little bit, but I used to say every year somebody would pitch the same story to us, the same story idea that has not been done, and certainly as long as I'm around is never going to be done, which is they'll pitch the story where his back is to the wall. There's no other choice. Something, the stakes are so high that this is the one time that Spider-Man has to kill somebody. And it's like, nope, no, he doesn't. Because that might be a great 20 pages, but that's not good for the character long term. And like I say, like clockwork, there was, I guess it's slowed down now. It's maybe been, 2 years or 3 years since the last time somebody took a run at doing this. It is sort of the forbidden fruit. People are constantly looking for what are the things that nobody else has done before, and how do we do them? And maybe there'll come a day when somebody will have such a brilliant take on this that they'll make it work and it'll work.
Mhm.
I don't tend to think so in terms of Spider-Man killing somebody. I still rankle over the one story that we published in which Spider-Man killed somebody, and don't think it works.
Mhm.
But people will constantly pitch that because it's the edgiest or the most shocking, or they'll want to do stories that are, we want stories that are relevant. We want stories that are taken from the times we live in, and what's going on us today. But we want that in metaphor,
Yeah.
and sometimes people will try to pitch the events, but with the characters in a sense. Where it's whatever, it's Captain America at the specific protest, and
Mhm.
either fighting, the protesters, or fighting the law enforcement that are there for the protesters. And it's like that's too on the nose.
Yeah.
The stories that we tell, touch on these issues and are relevant to these situations, but they're all in superhero terms and they're all metaphors. So if you're doing things that are right on the money, and it's whatever, it's Iron Man has to investigate election fraud, that's probably not a story that we want to do.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a way to touch on those things. If Iron Man is investigating something that went on weirdly in the voting process for the new Avengers leader or something, but even there, it's got to be couched in the language of the characters. It can't just be the thing it is. It has to be done with some subtlety, and it has to be done as even-handedly as possible, because for any issue that we might talk about, there are going to be people that are on all sides of it who are in the audience.
Yeah.
And there are certainly things that we can agree in general as a society are bad.
Mhm.
And those things, it's easy to go against. But there are plenty of situations where there are situations that exist in shades of gray, and different people stand at different points on that line. And you kind of don't want to alienate, a huge portion of the audience
Mhm.
by doing something that kind of says that their worldview is evil.
Yeah,
Um,
and also, what Marvel does and what comics does is not telling reality; it's an abstraction of reality, right? It's
sure,
you're a filter that use the reality to tell your own stories. You don't have to just look out the windows. Oh, we are just going to reflect that. You're not a newspaper, and some people think you are a newspaper. And I am always saying, no, Marvel comics or DC comics or comics in general, they are not. That's not their purpose. It's reflecting reality through the lens of creation, right?
sure. And there's also the question of when it's appropriate to do a story. Certainly, obviously, everybody that's hearing this, to one degree or another, has been living an isolated life in lockdown for many, many months.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we grapple with constantly in doing the books is, should all of our characters just be like hanging out in their headquarters and not going anywhere? And the answer is there'll probably be stories that are about these things and what
Mhm.
everybody is feeling and what they're going through. But when they're most likely to come out is after the situation is resolved. Because one of the problems with trying to do that now is still none of us know how long any of this is going to go on, or what's going to happen, or what turn, good or bad, the situation could take between the time when you start that story and the time when it comes out.
Yep.
And so it's just too easy to inadvertently do something that's offensive to a great deal of the audience by going too quickly.
Yeah.
So again, I feel like we'll certainly be doing stories, and I think there have already been stories that we've done, again, in metaphor, that
Mhm.
are reflective of the fact that our creators have all been living in lockdown and having to deal with being cut off from everybody and so forth. But I think especially once the virus is more under control and life begins to return to normal again more, we'll see more stories that are still metaphoric, but that are more directly related to that experience, because at that point, kind of like the stories being done, the situation will be done, and
Mhm.
the real life or death consequences of these things will have become real.
Yeah, and then you have some creators have asked me, and I asked you guys months ago what was going to happen with the mask situation. If the characters in the Marvel universe would be using masks,
Right.
and the answer you gave me, I think it was you, or CBN, I'm not sure, probably you.
Hmm.
You gave me was, why would we do that? Why would we have all the characters in masks? You're looking for escapism when you're reading Marvel comics. You're all day in lockdown in your house. You
Right.
can go out. When you go out, you go with a mask. You don't want to see that in our stories. You want to see heroes doing hero things.
Right.
Living their lives, but you don't want to suffer the same thing you suffer. The same things you have to do at home, right?
Sure, sure, but even with that, like we did that series of Heroes at Home
Yeah,
covers that
that's
became
true.
a little book
That's
that
true.
were all sort of about our heroes in dealing with the lockdown, and that's a way to still deliver some of that experience without the fact that if we start having Thor wear a mask, he may have to wear that mask for years.
Hmm.
Like we don't know how long this will be. So it's no longer just one story, it's every story. And suddenly everybody in Asgard can't gather on the streets and nobody people attacking. There's a whole different level to it that it adds in terms of complication just over the long haul.
Hmm.
Right now too, I do feel like, whether I said it or not, what you said a moment ago is right. That probably the audience, while they want their experiences, uh, acknowledged and ratified, they want the freedom to go places and do extraordinary things that our characters, can allow them to do vicariously through the stories and adventures that they have. And
Exactly.
after being trapped in their apartment, all day for a week, probably the last thing that they want to read is a story about Thor being trapped in his apartment.
Yeah.
So it is really a pick and choose thing. Once that situation and is taken care of and we're over the worst and the virus is under control, then yeah, maybe it's more likely we'll do a story where Thor is trapped in his apartment, but we'll also know what the beginning, middle, and end of that story is, how it works, why it's relevant, why it's cool, why it says something about Thor, why it says something about the audience and this common experience that everybody has had,
Hmm.
and then we can craft it appropriately, and not in a way that just becomes a weight around the neck of the reader as they try to just enjoy themselves for 20 minutes and get away from the fact that life has been harder than usual.
Yeah, and that you don't also want. I think you don't want. I guess what you don't want guys to happen is that I tell this anecdote a lot because it's really funny actually. When this started, Steven Soderbergh's the movie Contagion. You
Hmm.
looked at Netflix and it was science fiction.
Right,
A week later, they changed it to drama
right,
because it became too
exactly.
close, right? And
Yeah,
I don't think that's what I want as a reader or as a professional to get my superhero comics that close to reality while it's still happening, right?
yeah. Again, it's sort of cavalier for me to talk about it this way, but like the difference between, say, 9/11 and this, 9/11, we were able to do stories, the Spider-Man issue and the Heroes benefit book and whatnot, very, very quickly, like within a couple of months of the event happening. But that's because the event happened in one day. It
Yes.
was one terrible black day. It had an effect for months,
Yes. Yeah.
but the actual event was a single day. And so a couple of months later, being able to do those stories, and then reflect just the new reality of the world and the things that had come to light in the wake of that, happened because it was done. The pandemic is still going on. It's been going on for a year and it's still going on, and we don't know how long it's going to go. So it's not really appropriate yet to dig in and try to do stories about that, because we just don't know how any of this stuff is gonna turn out, or when.
Hmm. So yeah, that's also true. People is asking when are we going to get conventions back. Do you see San Diego happening this year or
I
no?
don't think so. I mean, I could be wrong, but and even if it happens, I can't imagine that the first San Diego that comes back is going to be like any of the San Diegos in the past, because I certainly love going to conventions, but I'm not going to go do a show if I don't think it's absolutely 100% safe.
Absolutely.
And some people will be just so hungry for it that they'll go and they'll throw the dice, and hopefully it will all work out and nobody will get sick and nobody will have a problem. But a lot of people will kind of stare at it and go, yeah, you know what, let's let somebody else do it first, and we'll make sure it's okay. We'll go to the second convention that they have, and I'm definitely in that boat. Like I don't feel a need to be the guinea pig to be the first person there, as much as I like the experience and enjoy going to different places and talking about the books with readers and seeing all the creators and having dinners and stuff and hanging around in airports for way too long. But while there's an element of risk, that's a tangible thing. So I don't know when we'll be able to get back to conventions. I hope this is all controlled and dealt with in a reasonable amount of time, and we can all get back to more regular existences. But I think it's foolish to rush into that. We've seen already what happens when we try. So it's all got to be. And I am perfectly willing to let somebody else be the first person down that gangplank to see if what's waiting on the other side is dangerous or not.
Yeah, I keep getting asked, "Oh, are you going to go to New York Comic Con this year if it happens?" And I'm like, probably not.
Right.
It's like being in a plane for 9 hours to get there and maybe get the contagion and bring it back. Probably not. So
yeah, exactly.
Wait until the next one.
Yep, exactly. It's an added level of uncertainty, and I'm sure we'll be back to conventions sooner or later. It's just, particularly the first couple are probably going to be a little more sparsely attended. That first San Diego back, San Diego is at such an insane scale anyway, that even if it was half that size, it would still be, monstrously huge. But I think it's going to be half that size. I don't think you're going to be able to get that many people to commit to go into that much of a petri dish that soon after the situation has been controlled.
Yeah, and imagine getting a lot of people together into the Javits.
Yeah,
that's scary. That's scary.
That was scary even without the pandemic.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. Also, one question here. You've heard this a lot more times than I have, and you'll say, "No, I know this," but I want people to know why. Many times people talks about Marvel having a house style in terms of writing and art and all that, and I always said I don't think Marvel ever had a house style. Of course you had Kirby, but you also had Ditko at the same time, and then you had Buscema and all the others. So maybe there's certain things in terms of the writing and the art that are essentially Marvel, but at the same time, do you think Marvel has ever had or has right now currently a house style, or is just what the story asked you for as an editor?
I mean, right now I don't feel like we have a house style. Certainly, we have artists or creators that are more popular and less popular. But if you look at the kinds of art that appear in our books across the line, it's about as wide a diversity of looks and approaches and styles, I think, than we've ever had. I think you could make an argument that in the 70s or the 80s, particularly the first half of the 80s, there was a feeling of a house style. Like there was a very specific thing that a Marvel comic was meant to look like. And even within that, not every single one did. But I think, if I had to put my finger on it, I'd kind of say that sort of Sal Buscema, action-oriented, 6 panels to a page, figures smashing the heck out of each other, excitement, and a quasi, not a realistic, but a quasi-realistic approach to all the characters. A specific sort of stylization was kind of what people wanted out of their superhero comics at that point. And most of the people, working were doing that. But particularly over the last 20 years, with the rise not only of digital but of manga and international comics becoming more readily available, people translated and so forth, the range of styles that the audience is more willing to accept has broadened, and consequently, the range of styles that we use are broad. There's always going to be a place. I'm always going to be happy to find somebody who can do that, Sal Buscema Marvel, kind of style in the 70s. In some ways, that's very much, what Joe Bennett can do on Immortal Hulk. But I'm also, just as happy to have Peach Momoko doing projects for us, or having Erica do projects for us, or any number of other creators who don't do what you might think of as typical Marvel comics. Jen Bartel just did he's in the middle of doing a bunch of sort of fashion-oriented covers for us, and they're great. They don't look like a Marvel comic that you would have seen in the 70s, but they're awesome, and that just helps to broaden the appeal of what we do. And not every comic is going to be for everybody.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of it. You need enough readers, enough of an audience to be able to be successful enough to keep going on. But I don't believe that it's not possible anymore for anybody to buy like the entire line every month the way it might have been when I was reading comics and coming up in the 70s. So not every comic is going to be for every reader, and the wider a net we can cast, the more readers of every different type we can get. When you go to
Go please.
Yeah, when you go to Netflix, you don't expect all the shows to be the same kind of show. You have a range of stuff, and different people can watch different things.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Sorry I interrupted you. Is the more diverse the audience, the more diverse the books, the better for Marvel, right? You want to be to spread as much as possible between different kinds of readerships, because it gives you more chances to grow as a company, right?
Yeah, I think so. And that doesn't mean you don't do the stuff that's sort of, again, at the core of what we do, which is, sort of meat and potatoes, exciting superhero stories that are about relatable characters and the problems that they have, both as superheroes and as ordinary people. But, you can encompass a wide range of approaches and styles and takes on doing that. Not everything has to look like John Romita Lunchbox.
What do you think makes comic? What is the most unique thing a comic has as compared to other narrative art forms, if you want to call it like that?
Well, I mean, certainly, comics, reading comics of any sort is a more personal activity. Most other forms, if you're talking about, film or television broadcast of any sort, streaming, it's a passive experience. You sit and you watch, unless it's something that's subtitled, in which case you have to read. And kind of a subtitled movie is probably the closest experience-wise to reading a comic. If you're reading prose, if you're reading a novel or poetry or anything prose, you're conjuring the visuals up in your mind. But there's a specific way that comics operate, that interconnectivity of word and image and panel to panel, the closure that happens in between them, in which every reader is a participant, and no two people read the same story exactly the same way. They don't hear the lines of the word balloon spoken in the same way in their head. The voice is different. One of the things years ago, 30 years ago now, I saw a study. Somebody did a study into comics and why people like them and what happens. And the secret, and I truly believe this is the key to the whole thing, is that comics are one of the few mediums in which both hemispheres of your brain are engaged at the same time.
Yes.
I always forget which one is which, but like one side of your brain processes language and the other side processes visual information.
Exactly.
So
I talk about that all the time, and I never remember which one is which. So don't worry, you're not alone.
Yeah. That I think is the key, and the people that love reading comics the most, almost regardless of what kind of comics they are, are people for whom somehow like that experience lights something up in their minds, and they enjoy it in a way that they can't get from a book or a film or a TV show or just about anything, because their brain is not operating the same way.
And there's also a part that I keep repeating, and I always compare it to Einstein. I know, guys, sorry, hate me. I repeat this all the time. I always say that comics is the only art form that can defy Einstein's theory of relativity, because in any other art form, the arrow of time, it just goes forward. It has to go forward. In a novel, in a movie, even if you have a flashback, the natural way to read it is, like that. But not in comics. In comics, I think it's natural just to go back and forth and to control time and space through the panel shapes, or just, this is 1 second and this is the next second, just because you moved it and you don't say anything. Just the language and the passing of the panels is telling you, you're moving with time. Do you agree with that? That comics is probably the only art form that where it feels natural to move back and forth in any way or shape you want with the timelines or the spaces, and it doesn't feel jarring?
No, I think that's true. It can feel jarring when somebody lays a page out poorly. But honestly, even the fact that, again, unless you're reading it, digitally, and even there you can scroll, the fact that you can flip back and forth in a particular story and go 20 or 30 pages back and see what was happening there, and then continue forward and so forth. You could do that in prose in a novel. You could go back to an earlier chapter if you wanted to, and so forth. But yeah, the way comic stories are syncopated and move through time, because there's still images. So each one is effectively it's a moment, it's a second.
Yeah.
And all of the movement, and all of the animation that's there, that's an illusion. That's in the reader's head and in the closure of their imagination, rather than what's physically on the page. And the best comic artists can convey that sense of animation and that sense of motion and life, even in those still images.
Do you think that's based on the use of also something that I love about comics, that I think is intrinsic to comic, is that the use of pattern recognition? I mean, in comics, we don't need to finish things. We just need to suggest them if you do it right.
Right. No, I think that's definitely true. Again, the reader is a participant, and so to some degree, you're dependent upon that reader, seeing a panel of your cup straight and a panel of your cup sideways, and being able to connect those two dots in their head and not be confused about what has happened, and that passage of time. And so, the reader is always a part of that process, and because of the way we process language and the way we process the visual shorthand of what we do. Yeah, you could suggest something even with 2 or 3 little scribbles that somebody will see as a face or a character or whatnot, because their mind fills in the rest of the information, and you've given them the bare minimum that's necessary for them to find that pattern and to recognize the thing that you're doing. It's the same sort of functionality as the fact that human beings are hardwired to find faces. And so if you look at around at things at the front of a car or an electric socket or whatever, inevitably the elements of that tend to arrange themselves into something that approximates a face, even though they don't. And it's just one of those things that we're kind of hardwired to do. So you can put 2 dots and a line down on a page, and people will read it as a smiley face.
Yeah, I always give the same example, that is intrinsic to humanity. When you when you hear, like a bush, something rustling there, you tend to jump, because that's, since we were a caveman. I'm still a caveman, but that's that.
Right.
But the thing is that you still jump and run away, because when we were in the caves, if you heard that rustling, that meant there was probably an animal that is going to kill you.
Yeah.
And we still react the same way. So that pattern recognition is still intrinsic to us.
Yeah, definitely.
And how important it is for you, before I forget, I always forget to ask this to editors, and it's stupid. How important it is for you, the page turn? How important it is for you in a story?
The page turn is important. I don't always attach quite the same amount of importance as some others, simply because I'm not always thinking about just the page transition, but the physical page turn of the book, and often, where a page turn is in the monthly comic is not where the page turn is when you put it in the collection and get rid of all the ads and things. But certainly the fact that you hopefully should have some sort of a hook, narratively, emotionally, dialogue wise, whatever, to carry you from the bottom of one page to the top of the next page is critical, because that's the point at which you're most likely to lose the reader or lose the spell of the story. That theoretically, when you open up a comic to read a story, you should sort of be fall into the world of that story and not come out until the end. And anytime there's anything in the storytelling that jars you, or that you have to stop and figure out what the next panel is or what's going on or what you're looking at, you the reader get pulled out of that story, and it's just it's lines on paper that you're holding in your hand rather than people. So in terms of creating that immersion, you want everything to be as smooth and as easy as possible. And certainly, because the transition from one page to the next, or turning from one page over to the next one, is the place where you're most aware of the physical object. Having some sort of little narrative hook or suspense moment or something that maintains your interest, I think is pretty key. But I don't always, because as often as the page turn is a turn, it's also the next page when two pages are sitting next to one another. So I'm much more likely to be concerned in any given issue about a page turn when there's something that's a more important story reveal or moment reveal to a scene, where you turn the page and see the monster. You don't want those pages ideally to be facing one another in the book, because the reader is going to pick up on the second page while they're reading the first, and so the surprise of the moment is not there. So those are the moments I'm most concerned about a page turn, and I'll move ads around or do whatever I need to maintain as much of that as is possible.
Do you have to? You don't name names, so it's not about names. But does it happen to you that you have to tell your creators to not talk down to the readers? And I mean to just, hey guys, the readers know a lot. They've been reading this forever, or even if they haven't, and they're new readers, they know how to read. They know how to spec things, and you're telling them, don't talk down to them because they're gonna catch your tropes, your tricks.
Right. I actually haven't had a lot of that experience. I kind of I lean in the other direction. I'm much more concerned with clarity. I'm much more concerned with, I think it's a real ongoing issue, particularly as we've come to rely on collected editions and the fact that books are all going to be together, and that the expectation that the audience knows who the characters are. That people will forget to name the characters in an issue, and it drives me bonkers.
Yes.
And a lot of our characters, some of our characters have powers that are readily apparent. You can look at the Thing and kind of know what he does and what he's about. But if you look at the Invisible Woman, you have to explain that every single time. And quite often we'll have writers who, because they're so used to this world and these characters, and they assume the audience is, who scuttle past that. And I'm constantly there going, no, you got to say invisible force field, because otherwise nobody's going to understand, or some of the people reading are not going to understand what is going on in this sequence. So I'm much more pushing towards, we need to be clear. We don't need to be ham-fisted about it or obvious. It needs to be part of the craft of the storytelling. But it's not a problem, or it shouldn't be a problem, to have the characters' names in the book, and usually even more so, they're superhero names. There's been a real push over the last 10 or 15 years where all the superheroes refer to one another as in their normal identity names, and that's okay because it makes the characters feel friendly or whatnot. But you got to say Spider-Man. You got to say Captain America. You got to say Iron Man. Don't just assume that because they've got a logo on the cover, that's going to be covered. and maybe they don't have a logo on the cover because
Mhm.
maybe they're in an issue that's not an issue of Captain America or Iron Man or whomever. Again, particularly when you get into teams and get into stories that have a lot of characters, you need to constantly be telling me who they are. And every once in a while I'll get into these arguments with writers who feel that that's artificial, and it's an artifice, and people don't talk that way. Like, I don't constantly say your name, David, as we talk about this.
Yeah.
But I tell them is, when you go home tonight, watch any episode of literally any television show. Just pick one at random, whatever you happen to be watching tonight or streaming, and you just count to yourself how often, particularly in an hour show or a half-hour show, the characters not only reiterate their names to one another,
Yeah.
but also their relationships to one another.
Yeah.
And that's because, particularly broadcast television, they're used to the idea that every 15 minutes they're going to have a commercial, and after a commercial, people will have gone away or will have come back and may not have been there for the first half of the show. And so characters are constantly calling one another by name and constantly saying, "You're my brother. You know that I'm blah 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 blah," and you just don't notice it because it's a part of the craft of what they do.
Yep.
That's what you should be doing in the storytelling in comics as well. It doesn't have to be, ridiculous, but it does need to be there at least to some degree. You need to have. What Mark Grunwald used to call it is you need to give the reader a reasonable fighting chance of being able to understand what you're doing.
Absolutely.
So I'm much more advocating on that side than I am the don't talk down. I don't want people to talk down or be too simplistic either.
Mhm.
But of the two, I would take that over a story that nobody can understand or follow, because they may not like or enjoy the story that's too simplistic or is too talking down to them, but they'll be able to explain it to you after they're done.
Absolutely. And the thing that you mentioned is funny because I always, when new writers ask me, I always mention 2 TV shows as the example of what you just said, which is Cheers and Friends.
Sure.
And in Friends, in every episode, you have Ross and Monica telling each other, "You are my brother, you are my sister," in every single episode.
Yeah.
And then Joey or Chandler, etc., they always name each other at least once. And if you look at where the ads went, it probably, you could see, oh, there was an ad there. It was different in Spanish, we have less ads. But I could see where in the United States you had the moment where the ad break, because right after that, you could see somebody mention each other's name.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
In Friends, it was so masterfully done. You never noticed if you weren't looking, but they did it several times in one episode.
Yeah, and television does that everywhere. You literally can pick just about any show, and that'll happen. So, it doesn't seem to me to be too great of a thing to ask.
Yeah, and also something that you also said, which I think is for me, I always hate it, is when, that's me, guys, and that's not Tom, that's me. when Superman and Batman are next to each other, and Superman calls Batman Bruce.
Right.
And I always think, no, you never call Batman Bruce. He's Batman, and he's not dressed like Batman, and he would effing hate to be called anything but Batman because he is Batman.
Right.
So when they're talking to each other as being in a superhero suit, I always find it weird that they call each other by their, civilian name, right?
Right. And I think that depends on circumstance. I have no problem with certain people in certain circumstances calling Captain America Steve because they know him, and his identity is not necessarily a secret. But somebody's going to call him Captain America in that issue. If I have my way, and probably early on, probably the moment where he bursts through the window on page 2, because that sets it, and then I don't have to worry about it anymore. And you understand as a reader, oh, that guy's Captain America. I got it. Even though that seems very simplistic now, but it's the more obscure, the more outre the character is, the more important it is. And the more complicated what they do, the more important that it is. I know that there are again, not to point at anything specific, but there are X-Men comics that are impenetrable simply because there's a dozen mutants in them, and all the things that they do are abstract and
Yes.
don't really make sense. Even things as simple as Emma Frost can use crazy mental telepathic powers, but she can also turn into a diamond.
Mhm.
And it's like those two ideas don't really naturally connect. So you need to explain it every single time. Otherwise, you're going to be confused. If you're in a story where she only turns into diamond and doesn't use her mental powers, you don't have to mention the mental powers. And
Mhm.
if you're in a story where she's only using her mental powers and never does, you don't have to mention that. But you need to make sure the audience understands what it is that's happening and what they're looking at when
Absolutely.
it happens.
Yeah, I always use as an example of this one issue. I won't name names. You find the issue yourselves, guys. It's an issue of Green Lantern when Green Lantern is never named Green Lantern at all. And I would say he's the Green Lantern. He's using a Green Lantern. That's his power. That's what defines him. And the whole issue, we never mentioned his name being Green Lantern. For me, that's a mistake. For me, you have to reinforce into people's minds. If he's the Green Lantern, we have to say it.
Yeah, and and I don't know how much this actually impacts. Every creator is a little different, but you know, don't be afraid of it, and don't be ashamed of it. The plain fact of the matter is, these characters are ridiculous. They're nonsensical. Most of them were created, as a children's medium. For all that we can do some very sophisticated and adult things with them, and they have silly names and silly things about them. It's but that's part of why people love them. It's part of why you love them. Don't be afraid to call Batman Batman. It's on the cover of the comic, and theoretically he runs around the Gotham City calling himself Batman, and everybody else knows that he's Batman. And when they talk about him on the news, they say Batman did this. And when they see him run down the street, they go, "Holy smoke, there goes Batman." So you can it's not a crime to say Batman, and it won't make your very compelling story, silly and not effective. All the best Batman stories or Spider-Man stories or whatever, the characters were called by their character names, and it was fine. Nobody minded that Daredevil was called Daredevil in Born Again. It's still Born Again. It's still a great story, and nobody's embarrassed that his name is Daredevil.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to let the characters say the dopey name, because that's what you're doing. It's self-defeating.
Yeah, I had a Greg Capullo here on Monday, and we were talking about this, about the stories, people criticizing those issues where, Gordon was in a robot suit because Bruce was out, the pointy ears, and that they just put the pointy ears because Scott wanted the pointy ears, and it didn't make sense. But suddenly Greg just jumped and started yelling at screen saying, "It's comic book, guys! It's comic books!"
Yes,
You're reading a comic and you're complaining because we do things that we do what we do in comics. It's a comic. Just enjoy it, right? Stop second guessing everything.
Right. I mean, you want there to be a certain sense of verisimilitude. You want it to seem realistic and plausible, so it's not just a bunch of nonsense for 20 pages. But within that, superheroes are childish. They are. They wear childish clothes. They do things that no person can really do. But that's the enjoyable part of it too, and so you can't be afraid to love the thing that you love. And again, it's not like it's an absolute thing. There are occasions where it's perfectly appropriate to have somebody called Captain America Steve or Iron Man Tony or whatnot. But somewhere in your comic, make sure you call him Iron Man.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have time for some questions?
Yeah, reasonably quickly. I should probably wrap up here in another 10 minutes or so because I actually have work to do.
Okay, yeah, I know. That's why I asked before going straight to the questions. Okay, so Alex Guimaraes, hey Tom, glad to see you here. Pablo Cabo Garcia says Tom is great. Daniel Maine, hello David, pleased to meet you, Mr. Brevoort. Questions: who was the first famous comic artist or writer you ever met, and how was it for you?
I think the first time I met anybody, it was 3 or 4 people. There was a signing for it was either for the Spider-Man newspaper strip or for the early Marvel trade paperbacks at a short-lived gallery out on Long Island called Cartoonerville. And my parents took me up there, and I met Stan and John Romita and Bob Larkin and 1 or 2 others. And it was mostly set out back, so it was in a big grassy area, and they were talking to people, and so there were constantly crowds around them. And I had a piece of paper, and they all signed the piece of paper for me. So it was fine. It was very. I was young enough, and I was tentative enough that it was very impersonal in a sense. Even more so than a signing, because it wasn't controlled. It's not like there was a line. There were just crowds of people around, talking and asking questions and interacting, and most of them were bigger than me and older than me, and so I didn't make much of an impact. But it was fine. It was good.
Okay. He also asked, which was, in your opinion, the best cliffhanger you have ever read in a comic book?
Whew, I don't know about the best. I can point to the.
Let's just change it to your favorite.
I can talk about the worst. that I've got ready loaded. I don't know necessarily what the best is, but the worst it was during the Claremont Byrne X-Men. There's an issue where Cyclops, realizing that Jean Grey has been mesmerized into becoming the Black Queen by Mastermind, but they still have their psychic rapport. He sort of goes into the mental plane, and he ends up fighting this duel with Mastermind that's carried out as like a fencing duel, a sword duel, at the end of which, like, Mastermind stabs his astral form and his physical body falls over, and the X-Men that are all standing there chained up are like, "Oh my God, Cyclops is dead," to be continued. And then the next issue, the splash page is Cyclops is standing up, and Nightcrawler's like, "Wait a minute, Cyclops is alive." That's what we in the business would call a fake cliffhanger. It's false drama. It's really only there because it's the end of the issue and they needed something big to end on. It doesn't pay off. It doesn't really go anywhere. And so I hate those. I also, one of the things that used to happen to me routinely in the 70s, when I was looking at and buying the early Marvel books that I read, was there'd be a cover, and the cover would be the last page in the comic. And that would drive me, that actually made me stop reading Marvel comics for years when I was a kid, because the cover would be whatever. I always say it's Spider-Man or Captain America is being thrown into a volcano. And he's thinking to himself, "Holy smoke, I've been thrown into a volcano. There's no way for me to save myself." And I think to myself when I plop down my quarter or whatever, how is he going to get out of this? He's being thrown into a volcano. And I would read the story, and at the end of the story, the villain would throw him into a volcano to be continued. And I'd feel cheated. Like, that was what I was here for. I want to see how he gets out. I understand you want me to buy the next one, but now I don't want to buy the next one. I feel like I was cheated. So I think those are kind of cliffhangers. That's not the cliffhanger's fault so much as it is the editor that commissioned the cover. But I don't like having the cliffhanger be the cover of a thing. That drives me bonkers too.
Yeah. And his last question: which is for you the hardest and the happiest decisions you've taken as editor?
I don't know. Again, I've done this for so long. It's difficult to quantify so many things so concretely. The hardest decision or the hardest choice on almost any instance is probably when you have to fire somebody, which, if you're going to be an editor, you have to do. And it's never pleasant and it's never fun, particularly in instances where sometimes you have to fire somebody who hasn't necessarily done anything wrong, but there's some need somewhere else. There's some condition, something going on. Somebody above you doesn't like what they're doing, or there's some need for a change, or the book isn't performing as well as you'd like. And I make no bones about this when I talk about it to my staff and my people. my reference to it is always, we have to shoot them. Because I think it really is like shooting people. And, unfortunately, I also believe that if you have to do that, you kind of have to do it straight up, which means as much as you can, you got to shoot them in the face. And that means you're going to be talking to them, whether in person or on the phone or in whatever way that's as personal and direct, and you don't mince words about it. You don't feel good about it, but you take out your gun and you shoot them, and they fall and they die, and you step over the body and you move on to the next thing, because that's the job of the editor. As an editor, you can't save everybody that you work with. We work with lots of people that we love to work with and that are super talented, but there are not always enough chairs for every single person that you might want to work with, and you can't save everybody. Sooner or later, you're going to have to shoot somebody.
Yeah, but please don't walk over the body. You don't need to do that's overdoing it.
You don't have to step on them. You step over them because you have to move forward.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Then it's fine.
Yeah.
Just Love from Howard asks, were you conscious at the time of the needed change that you had to do with Heroes Return? Was it difficult to bring people like Mark Waid or George Perez into the books back then?
I don't think it was difficult per se. Certainly, Heroes Reborn, the original Heroes Reborn, that was a difficult time because that was, the powers that be outsourcing the Marvel characters to Jim and Rob, and so they were taken out of the central office and produced elsewhere, packaged elsewhere, and they didn't really have much to do with us. It wasn't under any purview, and really there was the strong possibility that this would just be the thing, that Marvel would just license all the characters out to different people. The Marvel universe as we know it wouldn't exist, and Marvel wouldn't exist. So that was a tough time for the people that were in Marvel. Yep. When that deal was reaching its end and the characters were coming back, the toughest part of that is, whether or not you liked them, content wise, or liked all of them, all 4 of those books sold extremely well. There was a big audience that came, for those titles and stayed with those titles all the way to the end. And so coming back and doing the Heroes Return books that would bring them back into the Marvel Universe, we knew that those titles, those launches were going to be compared in terms of how well they sold, in terms of how well they were received, with the books that came immediately before. So anytime you're launching a new series of something, it's, super important to make a good show of it and really establish yourself. But the bar was set a lot higher for those titles. And in the end, it worked out all right. We did pretty well, and the books, all of them that came back were successful, including books like Thor that weren't actually published when the characters were with Jim and Rob. Thor was just a character in Avengers, so it worked out all right. It wasn't necessarily difficult, to get Mark or George on board. Mark had been writing Captain America before it went away, and so going to him and Ron Garney and saying, "Hey, would you come back and pick up where you left off?" wasn't too difficult. And George was at that time, he'd been doing lots of little odds and ends, mostly. For independent companies, and I think kind of longing to be back with the real mainstream characters. So it was a good confluence of elements where he was interested in coming back to Avengers, which he hadn't done for 20, 25 years, and really putting his mark on it again.
AA asks, how Tom question, in your opinion, how can the Marvel TV shows and movies change the traditional formats of publication in the comics industry? Thank you.
I don't know that either of those change the formats. I think what they do is they change the audience and create an interest and a hunger, like we were talking about earlier. And I think that audience is more likely to pick up material that's in collected form, or that's digital. So, again, we talked about this about an hour ago, that audience will seek out and find stuff, whether it's ordering books on Amazon or ordering the digital copies through Comixology or other digital reader. and then as they become invested in the stories and in our world, they're more likely to segue to the dedicated direct market comic shops that can really service all of the things that they want.
Mhm.
But I don't know that it changes the package.
No, I don't think so. I completely agree. I think it's about the audience, not about the formats, etc. Ramsey Hassan, there are lots of books on writing and drawing, but will you write one on editing? Because last week's chat with Greg Capullo, this Monday, it was this week,
Yeah.
he spoke about some traditional comics making knowledge being lost on the new editors.
Mm-hmm. I don't. Maybe. I mean, I do a thing every year at Marvel because I think Greg is absolutely right. There is, and I can see particularly since he's been working at DC over the last 7-8 years, and they've had a complete changeover pretty much in their editorial staff. Most of their experienced longtime editors, not all of them, but most of them are no longer there, and so I'm sure there's been some institutional knowledge that's been lost over the years. We thought the same kind of thing now 10, 11, 12 years ago. And so every year, and I do it usually during the week of San Diego when a bunch of editors are out and so forth. I do a 1 hour, which is now like about a 2.5 hour talk, a seminar every year for all the younger editors. That's just a distillation of here's the philosophy of Marvel publishing. Here's what we do and how we do it and why we do it that way. And here's, if you've heard us talk in shorthand about some of this stuff, here's what it means, so that knowledge isn't lost or doesn't evaporate into the ether. Maybe at some point I could turn that into a book. Probably not while I'm actively doing this, because one, I'm busy, and two, I feel like it's not like anything in it is revelatory, but it does feel a little proprietary. I don't need to give all the secrets out to DC or Image or whomever. But maybe, possibly at some point, it's certainly a thing that might be needed. Again, more I think with a Marvel or DC, with companies that are building interconnected universes of long-standing characters. It's a different thing to edit a creator-owned book or to edit a book that's only one universe in a title, a saga or something like that.
But also, even when you retire, if you ever retire, you're gonna have difficulty seeing you do that. But all joking aside, I remember that Denny O'Neill used to go to DC offices after he retired to give, as you said, seminars, to the new editors, so the knowledge wasn't lost, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, I see you doing that even after retiring.
Maybe so. And again, we do that sort of thing too, even on the artistic side. We've had, Howard Chaykin and Klaus Janson and Adam Kubert all come in at different points and do sessions. Sometimes for the younger artists, sometimes for the editors, and sometimes both, because we want to be able to capture some of that knowledge that people have.
Absolutely. Kate Robinson, this is a good one. What does an editor do in comics exactly? I can't find a clear-cut definition, and I know what one does as much as I know. I don't know what one does as much as I know what a construction worker does. They construct.
Right. The analogy that I use when I talk about this in places like this is that, being, at least in terms of a mainstream Marvel DC kind of a publisher, being the editor is like being the coach or the manager of a sports team. You don't go out on the field and play the game, but you get to choose who does. You get to choose who plays what position. At any given point, you can call a play. At any given point, you can choose to swap a player out and put a new player in, or send a designated hitter in to hit for somebody. You're responsible for the strategy of the whole team. You're responsible for making sure that they're able to be on the field in uniform, looking neat and ready to play at the time that the game is supposed to happen. You're responsible to get them from one game to the next game on time when they're supposed to be there. But you don't actually do the thing. That's kind of what the editor does. I don't make the comics. I hire the people who make the comics. I don't dictate the story. Sometimes I can suggest ideas if I want to, if I choose to. And I can certainly say who gets to do the comics that month or not. And I'm responsible to make sure that the books come out, at the standard of the Marvel Comics group every month or however often they're supposed to ship. Looking their best and capturing an audience, and I look out for the team or for the book as the primary motivator. Whereas the writer and the artist, the primary motivator is the story that they're telling. Which is why they may want to have Spider-Man kill somebody, and I will say, no, you can't have Spider-Man kill somebody because I'm looking out for the book more than I'm looking out for that one story.
Yes, and guys, it was still a mistake for Warner to let Zack Snyder do that with Superman in Man of Steel. I'm sorry. You like that? That's your problem. No, Superman doesn't kill, and especially not that way. When there was 15 different solutions to that wasn't involved in killing. Anyway, that's me. We're saying, love from Howard. How was the work of coordinating everything that you had to tell and clarify and arrange in the Avengers chronology in Avengers Forever?
That wasn't that hard for me because I didn't do most of the heavy work on that. That was mostly Kurt and Roger figuring out the chronology stuff. I mean, we talked about the story and we talked about a bunch of the specifics, and there might be stuff that's in it that was, that were ideas that I threw off or ideas that I spun a different way as we talked about it. But I couldn't tell you what any of that stuff was. That was and that's constantly what I do with any story that we're working on. I'll constantly throw out ideas or make suggestions, particularly when I think that there's a problem. Whenever I read a script and I think that there's some story problem, I'll go back to the writer and say, I think this is a problem, and I'll try to suggest a remedy, a solution. But I tell everybody, like, I don't care if you use my solution or not. What I care about is that the problem gets fixed. So if you have a different idea, you don't like what stupid idea I've come up with, that's fine. It's probably not that great an idea in the first place, and you've got something better, that's terrific. And it's also a valid solution to convince me that what I think is a problem isn't actually a problem. Like that too is okay. Just because I say something is a problem, if you don't agree, if you don't see it that way, you can try to convince me that I'm wrong. At a certain point, when you don't convince me, you're going to have to do something to fix it. But I'm willing to be convinced if you can convince me that what I think is a problem is actually, no, that actually works, and here's why it works, and here's how it works. On something like that was very historical. Roger did a lot of the legwork in terms of, if I'm remembering, putting together a lot of those pieces. But Kurt has a very strong walking knowledge of Marvel history, and I'm pretty good at it too. So, when we were doing it, it wasn't that difficult. It really just boiled down to somebody, and I believe it was Roger, had to sit down and read and take notes on all the Kang stories or all the Immortus stories and go, okay, now we find the thread that goes through them and connects them and makes sense of them all.
Did anybody, this is me asking, did anybody outside of you, Roger, Kurt, and Carlos understood what you guys were doing? Or they were all like, you know what? You know too much. We'll leave you alone. Let's
do you mean while it was happening or after the books came out?
While it was happening.
Again, nobody necessarily knew or cared that was the story we were telling. What people knew or cared was that, Kurt and Carlos are going to do this Avengers project, and, we're going to come out with it, and it's going to be exciting. It'll be in a slightly upscale format. It'll sell well. People will like it. But the actual story, what's in that was really, the creators and the editor. It was us coming up with that and saying, that'll be the story we're going to do. And in fact, that wasn't the story that we were going to do initially. There was a when we started, Kurt and Carlos were going to do a different project that was Avengers World in Chains.
Yeah.
And it ended up like we started doing that, and Carlos started doing designs, and very early on, it became apparent that there was another Marvel project that we thought was too close, too similar to that. And so we weren't comfortable with doing it, but we'd committed to doing a project. So there was going to be 12 issues of something. And that Kang story was going to be something that Kurt was going to do in the main Avengers title at some point. So it got repurposed over to Avengers Forever and fleshed out as its own thing there. So that kind of thing happens too. Every once in a while, we have to change direction and adapt to what's going on.
Mm-hmm. But I meant if anybody at Marvel understood what you guys were doing.
No, well, they understood that we were putting out an Avengers Forever book that was going to come out and fulfill the needs that the organization had for it to be made for this much money and sell this many copies so that we make this much money.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond that, I'm sure people that were reading it were just reading it like anything. I don't know how many people were reading it month to month to begin with. We spend a lot of time working on comics, and I think that means that a lot of editors and others don't have as much free time to spend reading comics for pleasure, particularly our comics. You might be more likely to read comics from somewhere else because you're more likely to find talent, or it's a little more at a remove from your job than it is to be reading the stuff that you're working on all day.
Absolutely. Pedro Mercader asks, hello everybody. If a great story puts continuity in trouble, what would be your priority?
I think it depends on what the continuity is. You could argue that you've got the best Spider-Man kills somebody story in the world, but it's got to be pretty damn convincing to get me to go along with that. You also have to convince me that the problem with continuity isn't solvable. Being not wanting to deal with continuity because you don't want to do the work, or you're feeling lazy about it, or you don't care, or you don't think the audience cares. That's weak. Quite often, if there's a problem where a story idea conflicts with something in continuity, there's a way to resolve that. Anyway, and it also depends on what piece of continuity you're talking about. Absolutely. If you're talking about doing a story today that there's one line or some small scene in some comic that we published in 1972 that says differently, I don't give a lot of weight to that. I would rather have the good story now than make sure that one reference in 1972 is sacrosanct. So it's always a weight and measure thing. But that having been said, it's not like we haven't published plenty of projects that exist outside of continuity. Spider-Man Life Story we did last year, and that's entirely out of continuity because you couldn't do that story in Marvel continuity because of the way it allowed Spider-Man and his cast to age in real time from 1962 to the present. So if you've got a great story that doesn't fit in continuity, we might still publish it, but we might publish it outside of continuity, and then everybody wins.
The Fantastic Four one you just announced this week, right?
Yeah, exactly. The same thing. Fantastic Four Life Story will also be, because it follows that pattern. It can't exist in continuity, so it doesn't. It is its own thing, and that's fine. You can do both.
Okay, guys, you know that normally I read all your questions and I use all your questions, but Tom has limited time. So if you see that I'm jumping on or reading some of the questions, it's because they're related to something we spoke before and because Tom has limited time. So sorry about not reading all your questions, okay? And Tom, as I said, whenever you have to leave, you just say it. That don't have any problems with me. Just say, I gotta go. Or one question and I'll go. Just say it, okay?
Right. Well, we should probably start. I've been here now for, I think it's about an hour 15. I probably should start to get back. I can do one more, certainly.
Okay,
so
one more? Okay, so I'm not even going to look. The first one I see. Felipe Lambarri says, Mr. Brevoort, 60s and 70s Marvel were perceived as transgressors, storyline speaking, even as a company. However, nowadays, I think Marvel is perceived or following the politically correct trend. Why this? Do you agree with it? Thank you.
I don't know that I agree with that, wholeheartedly. I think, Marvel culturally, in terms of, the range of characters that we talk about and the kinds of stories we do, is broad, and we try to keep it broad, and we kind of try to keep it as reflective of the zeitgeist, the world outside our window that we always talk about, and the audience. That having been said, what was permissible to say or to show a bunch of years ago is no longer considered that.
Mhm.
You can look at any 1940s, particularly during the war issue of Captain America, and Captain America is fighting horrific, monstrous caricatures of either Nazi soldiers or Japanese soldiers, and typically potentially hanging around with people of color who look like awful offensive cartoons.
Mhm.
We would never do that today because the culture has moved away from that. I don't feel like it's necessarily being politically correct, and being politically correct you could call, there's either side of that depending on where you happen to be on an issue. One thing is politically correct or not. We
Yeah.
try to be open to all sorts of human experiences and all sorts of points of view, and hopefully there are Marvel comics and Marvel stories that can appeal to you no matter who you are, and we're constantly trying to make that range and make that reach wider. And we haven't necessarily gotten to everybody yet, but we're always trying to make it wider and wider as we go. I don't see that as being politically correct. I see that as very much in following with the example that Stan and Jack and Steve and all those guys did in the 60s, when they were the first company to crack the color barrier and start featuring characters of color, not just as superheroes but as regular people or people on the street, or just incidental bystanders. And that goes for any kind of identity you might have: sexual orientation, ethnicity, religion, background, whatever the case may be. I also, I think we're cautious, or try to be cautious, about the material that we publish. We're not looking to offend anybody, and sometimes we foul something up, or somebody makes a mistake, or these things happen. But we're actively not looking to do that. That too, I don't feel is just like being politically correct. We're trying to be plugged into the zeitgeist of the now, and what the audience wants and is interested in, and what makes for the best stories and storytelling.
Yeah, and also, being politically correct is just so subjective, right? I mean, some people is going to say, "Oh, having America Chavez." I mean, that's being politically correct because you want, a female, and that's Cis Latina, and blah blah. And but you're going to have the other side of people telling you, "No, that's Marvel." Why do they do that? Why do they have? Why do they cater to women? Blah blah blah. So you're always going to have some people that loves it and some people who hates it. Some people who thinks it's politically correct, and some people who thinks it's against what their values are, right? So in a way, you cannot be thinking as an editor. And this is my last question, I promise, and I'll let you go.
It's okay.
You can't always be thinking about what the reader is going to think, because some are going to think one thing and the other is going to think the opposite, right?
Well, yeah, we have a whole range of readers. It's also true, though, that anything, anything that's a new development, that is transgressive, as the questioner said, after time has gone by, it just becomes the state of the world. For example, like a show like The Simpsons, when it first came out, was a big breakthrough. It was a different kind of comedy. It was a different view of an American family, and it was a bit controversial when it first launched. Whether that was on Barbara Bush talking about it, or whatever. And today it's just not seen as being as edgy or as much of an outlier as it had been. And some of that's just the simple fact that it's been there consistently, and the world around it has moved up to meet it. The things that were so were considered transgressive or shocking or forward thinking in the 60s when Marvel did it, now are routine. And as we said at the very beginning of this broadcast, now everybody at every publisher does those things. It doesn't mean we're not still constantly trying to move things forward and push the envelope, but it does mean that that energy of initial inspiration can't easily be constantly duplicated. You're constantly having to work for it and work harder at it, because the envelope is constantly being pushed.
Absolutely. Okay, guys, I would love to keep going. We have like 20 more questions, but Tom has a life to go back, has a lot of work to do. It's Friday. Believe me, I know there's a lot of good things to get to the printer. And,
Yep.
and I know that the moment this is over, we're going to start exchanging emails like crazy. So
Yep.
we have to go. So thank you so much, Tom. Please don't cut because I want to say proper thank you after we're off the
Okay.
feed. But
All right.
thank you so much for being here. And thank you for everything.
Happy to
And I
do
want
it.
to say this publicly and in camera. Thank you for everything during all these years we've been working together. As a friend, as a professional, as everything, you're amazing. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate everything that you've done over the years too.
Thank you, sir. And to all of you, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Remember this thing, wear your mask, don't be an asshole. And see you back on Tuesday with writer Charles Soule. Take care and out with you and in with us in 4